Welcome to Season 5 of the Agile Brand with Greg Kihlstrom, where we talk with enterprise and technology platform leaders about the people, processes, and platforms that make marketing and customer experience successful, scalable, and sustainable. This is what creates an Agile brand. I'm your host, Greg Kihlstrom, advisor and consultant for Fortune 1000 marketing and CX leaders and teams as principal and chief strategist at GK5A, and best-selling author, keynote speaker, entrepreneur, and Agile certified coach. The Agile Brand podcast is brought to you by TEKsystems, an industry leader in full-stack technology services, talent services, and real-world application. For more information, go to teksystems.com. To sign up for the Agile Brand newsletter and get the latest insights and articles on marketing technology and CX, or to purchase a copy of my latest book, House of the Customer, go to gregkihlstrom.com. You can also find all my books on Amazon and other retailers. And now on to the show. Today we're going to talk about proposals. Love them or hate them, they're a requirement for so many companies, consultancies, and consultants to get new customers and new projects. Today we're going to talk about some ways to do proposals better and smarter. To help me discuss this topic, I'd like to welcome Joe Ardeeser, founder and CEO at Smart Pricing Table. Joe, welcome to the show.
Hey, Greg. Thanks for having me. Excited to chat.
Yeah, looking forward to talking about this with you. Why don't we get started by you giving a little background on yourself as well as what you're currently doing at Smart Pricing Table?
Yeah, well, I started in the agency life probably about 14 years ago, and I had a web design shop in the Seattle area where I kind of grew up as a business guy, learning how to do sales and proposals and marketing and managing a team. So that's kind of my background. We did it was a great run, learned a lot of lessons. But one of the biggest things that we hyper focused on was the proposal writing process. I found that a lot of times just our offering and our prices would change. And so we did a ton of work in that discipline that eventually led me to start Smart Pricing Table, which took our findings and incorporated it as a SaaS product.
Nice. Well, yeah. So anyone that has written proposals and, I've certainly written or at least contributed to, hundreds of proposals, right. Maybe not thousands. It feels like thousands, but it's at least been hundreds in my career. Anybody that's done this, they know the pains, right? There's researching, there's writing, budgeting, sending, waiting. Then, after all that, you find out if you even won or if you lost and have to write more proposals to get different work. So, I glossed over, a bunch of these things, but, when you're thinking about writing proposals and certainly when you were thinking about starting a company and building the product and everything, what are some of the biggest challenges that you consider when writing proposals?
Yeah, well, I hear over and over, Greg, just how much displeasure people have at proposal writing. In fact, I had a friend recently comment that my business, which is all around proposal writing, is an incredibly important one, but also terribly boring. But the reality is, when you figure it out, proposal writing can be a lot of fun. Some of the biggest challenges, there's quite a few categories, but I think one of them is it takes too much time. I think a lot of CEOs, a lot of head salespeople, they have so much going on that getting even 15 minutes to work on a proposal can be challenging, let alone maybe the 2 or 3 hours that it really should get. And so I think there's time and procrastination and putting it off and that challenge.
Yeah. I'd
also say a lot of back and forth. I think we've all, kind of gone through that process where, it feels like, there's 10 changes initially, then there's 5, then there's 3. Right. And then they get the actual decision makers in the room.
Right.
Like you weren't even talking to the right people, and then you just start all over. I think that's a big pain point. I also think there's a big challenge, just with it's kind of like writing content for your website. A lot of people can find that an excruciating experience. I think the blinking carrot when you're writing a proposal can also be, a hard thing to overcome. There's just this brain fog mixed with, I have so much to freaking do.
Yeah. Right.
Um,
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
the list is so long of
Yeah.
not
Fair enough.
not charging enough, client misunderstandings, something called, I call it the vague vortex, where we're vague, and because of that, the client kind of has us. We have to do whatever they want because we weren't clear about what we're
Yeah.
actually going to deliver. Lots and lots of pitfalls in the work.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, yeah, there's a lot there. And as you mentioned, there's probably a lot more too, as far as challenges. I mean, proposals there, it's a necessary evil. To your point, when there's a good process in place, it's at least easier and better and smoother. Some companies, it's just, they think of it as a necessary evil, and it's just got to get done, and it's just a painful thing that it's like taking your vitamins or whatever, or eating your vegetables. Like, it just got to get done. But why should companies invest in the process itself?
Yeah, I often look at business as kind of like a cavern where you have a flashlight and you're exploring different parts of the cavern.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, it can take months or years to really get to the different, parts of it. And I'd say that proposal writing is one of those, very important parts that you have to explore. And until you do, there can be a lot of unnecessary pain.
Mm.
As far as why companies should invest in their proposal process, well, one of the questions we have to ask is what actually is a proposal? And if you sit down and think about it, so often what a proposal represents is a plan.
Yeah.
And though a lot of companies will look at proposals and they'll think, well, that's a really boring thing. I don't want to think about that. I don't like that. The process of it. When you pitch it as it's really a plan, well, that gets interesting.
Yeah.
Because if I'm going to do something with a customer, I want to plan to succeed. There's the saying, of course, failure. If you fail to plan, you plan to fail.
Right.
If you do proposal writing well, it's the foundation of your project, and it can lead you to success. Some of the big ideas, I think, would be shorter close cycles. If you're clear with your offering, if you know what you're actually selling, you're going to have less follow-up questions. Customers and prospects get the sense that you've done this before, which is very important. I would also say maintaining profitability. Many times the reason why we lose our margin is because we weren't clear. There weren't handles to grab onto. The customer said, well, you just said that you do this. And I'm thinking,
Right.
You're right, I did, but I'm making minimum wage, right? Or my company is going bankrupt because we don't have handles to grab onto.
Yeah.
I'd also say reducing scope creep, which is very connected, of course, with profitability. I'd say joy in writing proposals. Did you know that you can actually enjoy the proposal writing process? I promise you. And we
Wow.
can talk about that.
Yeah.
And then the last one I'll mention is kind of really big picture. Listen, when you create great proposals that lead to great projects, you end up with a great company, right? It really is the foundation. And I found running my agency for 12 years, if we did a shoddy proposal, not only would it affect my morale as the leader, but that would also go down to my team. If a team knows that you're not making money, if they realize that the project is going haywire, that definitely affects a lot. And you don't want to lose your team over bad projects.
Yeah. And I totally agree with you as far as, the proposal isn't just a proposal, right? I mean, it is setting the stage for, there's certainly going to be a contracting and procurement process or whatever, but it is setting the stage for the work to be done, and how, whether it's well defined or ill defined, or whatever. So totally, there's some very long term implications of that. But you mentioned actually enjoying writing proposals, and so I got to follow up on that, because I'm maybe still not at that level of whatever Zen or whatever you want to call it. Then
Right.
what does that look like? And what are sort of the, does that mean that you're writing a better proposal? Does that mean that you're making peace with the process? Or what does that kind of look like?
Yeah, I think you're making peace with the process by actually having one.
Fair point.
I break it down into 5 big ideas, but I'm really going to hone in on this talk with really one really big idea. I like it, that if I can leave your audience with one stellar concept, I'd love to do that, which I'll share here in a second. But I'd say a simple framework for writing better proposals. The first one I'd say is capitalize with technology. So use proposal specific software. Okay. I could talk about this a ton. Proposal specific software is going to have proposal specific features. I'll let your audience kind of fill in the gaps there on the value of that. The next one is to create an offering catalog. And I'm going to come back to that. That's my biggest tip.
Yeah.
Then I'd also say giving your customers options or optionality. That really helps break down or cut down on the back and forth. It builds trust because you're giving them influence over the project architecture. A big one I also talk about a lot is the proposal review meeting. We spend all this work doing a proposal, but getting in front of your customer and actually selling the proposal on a proposal review meeting is huge. Happy to talk more about that if we have time. And then the last part of the framework. So I'll restate this: proposal specific software, catalog your offering, give your customers options, implement a proposal review meeting, and then the last one is continuously improve. So if it's all about creating a better project for your customer, then what you want to do is every learning that you get from your projects, you want to then take that back to your system and codify those learnings and make it better, right?
Yeah.
Just like a product where you're always taking your learnings and you're making a better product, do the same thing with your proposal system and you'll be blown away with the results. If I could, though, Greg, get back to the catalog you're offering. Can we talk about that for a minute or two?
Definitely. Yeah.
So the biggest thing I learned, so I had a web design agency for 12 years. And the biggest thing I learned was about halfway through. I can't remember who told me this, but they said they presented the concept of productizing your offering.
Yeah.
So what this means is, instead of grabbing line items or offering text from past proposals, take the time to start building a library of your offering, the different offerings that you present. So, for instance, if you did online marketing, maybe one of your offerings is social media management. Okay.
Yeah.
What a lot of businesses will do is they'll give an offering like that, and they'll be vague. They're not really clear about it. But if you can start to flush that out and define it, okay, here's what's included: X posts per month. I'll also engage with your comments. People that engage with the posts that I'm putting out, I'll also engage with those comments. Limitations, upsells, all this kind of stuff. If you can start defining that as a line item, a reusable one, it's incredible what that can do.
Yeah.
So, and that was just one example, but
Yeah. No, that's great. And that kind of leads to, you mentioned reusability, and I was at a professional services conference a few months back, and that's kind of the holy grail, is this idea of this 100% reusable proposal template, which, there's some things that may need to change, and certainly I'd love your thoughts on this, but on a case by case basis. But do you see this as how much of a proposal can or even should be reusable? I mean, using an example like your web design agency, for instance, because obviously different types of scope can be vastly different or whatever. But in a case like a company like that, is 100% reusable realistic or even possible, or is it like some 90% or something, or is that even the right question to ask?
Well, I think that's a great question, and the value of continuous improvement is you're moving towards that with every new project. So
Yeah.
I would say, I have a lot of experience with this because we were trying to get to that as far as we could, and I would say you never get to it 100%, nor should you necessarily, but 80-90%. What I found at my old agency is we were able to craft most of the proposal with reusable line items that we could then tweak. So as a specific example, let's go back to that social media management line item. So you're building that reusable line item. You're building other reusable line items like cold email outreach or website design or whatever the case in this marketing example. Just because that social media management offering could change per customer doesn't mean that I shouldn't templatize as much as I can, right? Because if I have a line item ready to go, maybe it's only 70 or 80% finished. Well, I'll still take that time back, right?
Yeah.
And
Right.
if you have structured line items or structured content, you're not just starting from scratch. You can kind of look through the line item, tweak it real quick, make adjustments for your prospect, and you're back on the road or you're on to the next thing. So I do think that getting to 90% can be achievable, 80-90%, but you've got to be continually building your system, and each project is helping you build momentum.
Before we continue, I'd like to introduce you to a sponsor of the show, Partner Hero. Customer service outsourcing has long been available mainly to large enterprise businesses with long-term contracts and onerous procurement processes. Partner Hero is challenging business as usual and bringing the benefits of outsourcing to small and medium businesses as well as startups. With short, flexible contracts and fast ramp-up times, Partner Hero is making customer support outsourcing a viable option for small and medium businesses and startups. It's perfect for companies with seasonality expecting a temporary spike in volume or that simply need to scale up. And their focus on quality means your customers will get an experience that feels like it comes from your team. If you're ready to bring in outside customer support help for your company that feels like it's part of your existing team, check out Partner Hero. Head on over to partnerhero.com/agile, that's partnerhero.com/AGILE, to book a free consultation with their solutions team. Mention you heard about Partner Hero from the Agile brand and they'll waive the setup fee. Now let's get back to the show.
So then you've done this, you've put together a great proposal, you send it out, and it just kind of goes into someone's inbox or something like that. How do you maximize, like, is there something in the writing and the creating of a proposal that can maximize engagement from prospects after sending it? Like, how do you keep the dialogue going when you've just kind of thrown something over the fence and stuff like that?
Yeah, I love that question. And I would recommend the proposal review meeting. So let me kind of outline this. And there are other parts, but I think this is key. So when I would do proposals, the basic process would be like this. I'd meet with the prospect. I'll pretend it's you, Greg, and I'd have a 30-minute call with you, like a sales discovery call. And I'd finish that call and I'd say, hey, Greg, I really appreciate you downloading all that information. Okay. What I'd like to do, the next step in our process is I'd like to do a 20-minute proposal review meeting. I would then bring up my Calendly in your time zone, Greg, and I would I'd ask for a day that works well, and then I'd show you my time slots. Yeah. Now, I didn't ask you if you wanted to do the proposal meeting. I just said it's part of the process, and that makes it feel concrete, right? Every once in a while, you'll have someone push back, but that actually shows their cards a bit. And you kind of have to ask, like, how serious is this prospect if they can't give me 20 minutes, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So then the attendance rate on that meeting is really high, because you have something they want. They want to see your services and your prices, and they want to compare that to other proposals. And I think this is key, you don't send them the proposal until after the meeting, okay, with this setup. And then when you're actually on the meeting, it's so helpful, because what you have the opportunity to do is you didn't just create a proposal, but you have the ability to sell it. Here's why I set it up this way. By the way, Greg, here's some additional options you might want to consider. We can't get into all the details here, but there's a lot of, I kind of described this. You might not realize we have this offering. It's a great opportunity to surface questions, nail down prices and their selections. And I just can't recommend the proposal review meeting enough. It's a great strategy.
And I think to your point, I mean, I know this has happened to me, or I used to own a marketing agency as well. And, if somebody really doesn't want to talk about the proposal with you, to what you were just saying, chances are they need to show someone 5 proposals and choose one. And if you're number 4 or 5, you're just, you're helping somebody check a box, right? So, getting the meeting, or at least seeing the willingness to take a meeting, at least indicates you're in the running, right?
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
I think that's really helpful. And a lot of times with sales, it's like it kind of similar to, if someone's willing to pay you money, that's a signal that's a lot stronger than what they're actually saying. And so in the same way, them scheduling the meeting, being willing to do that is a key indicator for you. And I also like to say, the more they're talking to me, the less they're talking to my competitors. And how many other companies are doing this. It's a great way to distinguish yourself.
Yeah, that's great. Well, yeah. And so then along those lines, I mean, so, we talked about creating a proposal. We talked about getting that meeting. Any tips or thoughts on, the next step beyond that is, to go through some kind of procurement process. So, is there anything about the proposal itself or the proposal process that helps get the signature faster, or, gets approvals faster, ways to think in that way?
I would say one of the biggest things that comes to mind is optionality. When you think of optionality, it really kills so much of the back and forth. If you've got maybe a base offering with a few optional items that they can turn off and on, and you've got clear descriptions of those optional services, it can really, really streamline things. I remember recently I had a contractor who I was doing some kind of home service, and they sent me a bid, and I'd asked them, could you give me option A, B, and C? And unfortunately, they didn't, and it just made it take so much longer.
Yeah.
So that's a really big one. I'd also say I like to ask big questions, or high-level questions, to help understand the process. So I might say things like, just so I can understand, what does the decision-making process for this project look like?
Yeah.
A lot of times we don't have, because we don't ask. Right. But most companies will just volunteer that information. You might also ask, who are the key decision makers? And I like to ask, what would happen if this project didn't go forward? All those questions can help you understand what's going on their side, and can potentially help you expedite. The final thing I would say is, I love the acronym FAM-BAM. Okay. So it's from a meeting, book a meeting. And I already referenced that previously with the proposal review meeting. But I like to, ask those high-level questions, get the information from them, and then I like to book a meeting. Maybe they say, well, John's the decision maker. He's out on vacation for 2 weeks. I would then say, awesome. Hey, well, I'll send this proposal over. Could we meet middle of July and see if there's any questions that surfaced from John? Right? Yeah. You've got the next step, you've defined it, and you're working towards that close.
Yeah. No, that's good. Definitely, that's great stuff. And, I also wanted to talk about, maybe to go back to the beginning of the process. So, we've talked about some great ways to get from proposal to to winning the project. But, going all the way back to not every project originates with a request for proposal or an RFP, but a lot do. And I've certainly responded to a lot of RFPs in my days as well. So this is more, geared to those sending out, but, having responded to plenty of proposals as well, what advice would you have for those companies? In some cases, garbage in, garbage out, right? Like a bad RFP, which I've seen plenty, is not going to yield the best proposals, regardless of how good the proposal process is. So, what advice would you have to those people out there? They have a big project, there's a lot on the line, they've got to send an RFP out. Like what would make a better proposal, from that starting point?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the things that can really kill RFPs is having way too much going on. You're asking for way too much. I know a lot of times with government RFPs, you just, it's kind of the nature of the game. You kind of have to do that.
Right.
But I would say, if you're asking for a million parameters or just a ton from your vendors, you're going to get a lot smaller of a response of people that are actually responding to those RFPs.
Yeah.
Another thing I would say is what I found responding on the other side, responding to RFPs, is that a lot of the companies wouldn't meet with my agency. And that really bugged me. You've got to understand that an RFP, a proposal in response to an RFP is helpful. And it's kind of like a first kind of measurement of how well a company listens and responds. But a lot of times it doesn't get through. A lot of things don't get through it. And so I think having an openness to at least, a short list of the folks that you're willing to do a follow-up call with, as opposed to, you got to go through this really complex process. I think you're gonna lose a lot of vendors because vendors have a lot of different opportunities, and if you make it too hard, they're just going to go to some of the easier ones with customer prospects that are the bar's not quite so high.
Yeah. I mean, proposals, they take, no matter how streamlined the process is, it takes time, and it's overhead time, especially if you don't win the proposal. So yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I think it's, RFPs, they're necessary evils in many organizations. I mean, that's just part of their process. You mentioned government. That's certainly, there are just certain requirements that have to be met. And in some cases, there's restrictions from meeting. But yeah, I always worry about, unless there's some like government guideline or something restricting from having meetings or anything, I always worry about those that just, they send out an RFP and just want 20 responses. And what are the odds, if you don't know who they are, of you getting picked in that scenario? Just kind of, it feels like a time waste. And to your point, I think a lot of the better and more savvy respondents are going to choose not to respond. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think that's we know we played the game. We know how it works, right? There could be a certain requirement. If it's permissible, the company that's sending out the RFP, even just a personal note to some of the folks that you're sending it to, just saying like, hey, we are sending this out to a lot of people, but just so you know, I'm very interested in your company. Now, I get sometimes that wouldn't be permissible. Right. But you hit a good point there, Greg. So many, I would get these RFPs all the time, and it's like, how do I know? I could put all this work into this, and you end up choosing. There's a connection of a connection, and turns out 80% of the people never had a chance.
Right.
Right. It was just checking a box, getting up to 15 or something like that.
Yeah, it's tough, and again, there's considerations on both sides, but I think it's when you can try to have that communication. I think it makes for a better project in the long run if you have that early on, and there's just less mismatched expectations and things like that.
Right.
Yeah. Well, Joe, thank you so much for joining. One last question before we wrap up here. You've given a lot of great advice already, and definitely, recommend that people check out your site and everything after this as well. But one last question. What's one piece of advice that you'd have for a company that knows they need to improve their proposal process, but maybe not sure where to start, and where should they begin?
I would go back to the big idea of productizing your offering. Just start doing that. At minimum, open up a Word doc and start spelling out your offering in a repository way, like as a template, not on an individual customer. There's so many benefits of going through that process. I should also mention, Greg, on our website at Smart Pricing Table, I have a profitable proposal blueprint. It's a free guide that I suggest to your listeners if they're struggling with the process. And I also do free demos of our product where I can go over a lot of these principles as well.
Great.
That guide itself is a really helpful tool.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, again, I'd like to thank Joe Ardeeser, founder and CEO at Smart Pricing Table, for joining the show. You can learn more about Joe and Smart Pricing Table, and we'll have a link to that guide as well in the show notes.
Thanks again for listening to the Agile Brand with Greg Kihlstrom podcast, brought to you by Tech Systems. If you enjoyed the show, please take a minute to subscribe on your podcast channel of choice and leave us a rating so that others can find the show more easily. You can access more episodes of the show at www.gregkihlstrom.com. That's GregKihlstrom.com. To get a copy of my latest book, House of the Customer, visit my website, or you can find it on Amazon or other retailers. The Agile Brand is produced by Missing Link, a Latina-owned, strategy-driven, creatively fueled production co-op. From ideation to creation, they craft human connections through intelligent, engaging, and informative content. Until next time, stay agile.